Alright, so for this video, we're gonna do Neymar. We're gonna see where he is ranked in the attractiveness scale. But before I start, I just want to tell if y'all want me to rate y'all face, I will have my email and I will also have my IG down in the description. Make sure to send a little video. I will have also examples showing right now of what I would like to see if you want to get your face rated, and it can go for males and females. It really doesn't matter what gender you are, and yeah, so you can be able to get your face rated by me, and you will be able to know exactly where you are ranked. His overall facial rating is a 6.9. How rare is that? That is 1 in 70 people. The percentage of people is the top 1 percentile. His side facial score is a 68%. His front facial score is a 46%. His total facial harmony score is a 55%. His facial dimorphism is a 6.5. His body fat factors is an 8.5. His miscellaneous features is an 8.5. The tier list is to the right side. Tier 1 is ideal, Tier 2 is near ideal, Tier 3 is normal, Tier 4 is a slight flaw, Tier 5 is a flaw, Tier 6 is a huge flaw, and Tier 7 breaks harmony. His overall facial assessment breakdown, his best features is to the left side, his worst is to the right. Let's start with the best features first. Long ramus, good hair texture, perfect nasal length, forwardly grown mandible, low body fat, good skin texture. Worst features, long shaped head, long chin, round nasal tip, narrow jaw angle, lower hyoid bone, eyes are closer set. These are the rating scores of other celebrities so you can compare. His facial dimorphism is 20%. And since he is a male, we're going to go look at the left side. And I gave him a check on neck width, dominant lower third, brow ridge inclination, gonial angle, nasal projection, nasal frontal angle, he gets half of that, and ramus length, so his ramus to mandible length. His body fat factors is perfect, and his miscellaneous features, he does get 0.5 taken off for the flared ears, but that's it. Alright, so let's start off with the first measurement, which is the eye separation ratio, and he gets a tier 4 for that. And a tier 4 is kind of off. Like I said again, his eyes are a little bit more on the compact side. So preferably you want eyes that are a little bit more, not too wide, but not too narrow or not too close. You want it to be kind of like in between. Even though men can kind of get away with close-set eyes, his is just a little bit too close. His facial thirds is a tier 1, so he does have even thirds, and this is perfect. His canthal tilt is a tier 3 at 3.5 degrees. 3.5 degrees is not too off, but if it's anything lower than I should say around like 2 degrees, that's when it'll start kind of looking negative, even though it's not, but it'll just have the appearance of being that. But 3.5 is within the normal range. His facial width to height ratio FWHR, so how compact are his facial features relative to the width of his face, and his at 1.96, so that is ideal. His jaw frontal angle is 76 degrees. 76 degrees means that he does have a narrow jaw angle, and we will see later on why he does have a narrow jaw angle. His cheekbone high settiness is a tier 1 at 0.85, so he does have very high set cheekbones. His total facial height to width ratio is a tier 5 at 1.49. So this means that he has an extremely, and I mean an extremely long head shape, all right? And this is probably due to many other things too. And I will probably say it's because of his jaw being downswung or his jaw angle being long. And also he does have a pretty lengthy forehead as well. So maybe those things kind of compromise to it. But overall, his head shape is on the longer side. His bigonial width is 93%. 93% is perfectly fine. It's a little bit too wide, but it's not that bad. The chin to philtrum ratio is a tier 4 at 3. So 3 means that his chin is literally 3 times as long as his philtrum. So the bottom portion is 3 times longer than the upper portion, and that is off. So you do not want to have a chin that is that long. And this also may contribute to his jaw angle being narrow. So if you do have a long or very long chin, it can also make your jaw angle look narrow. Neck width is a tier 1 at 94%, so he does have a very wide neck, and that is good. His mouth to nose width ratio is 1.37. Now 1.37 is almost close to the ideal range at 1.38. So this is not technically a flaw or anything like that. This is damn near perfect. But if you have a nose that is a little bit too wide, it can unharmonize with your other features of your face, like the eyes and also the mouth as well. So preferably you do want to have just a smaller nose in its width of its iliac base. The mid-face ratio is a tier 2 at 0.94. Now what this means is that his mid-face is just slightly longer, and yes, men do have longer mid-faces on average, but this is actually near the ideal range, just at the lower end of it. This is not a flaw by any means necessary. It just means that his mid-face just is a tad bit longer than it needs to be. His eyebrow steadiness is a tier 3 at 1.1. So with 1.1 is just medium. It's not like low to medium or low set eyebrows. It might seem like it kind of a little bit, but it's really not. This is perfectly normal for a male. His eye spacing is one eye test. So this is the one eye test to see if his eyes are one eye's width apart, which it is not at 0.82 or 82%. And 82% means that his eyes are a little bit closer set. So this is one of the reasons why his eyes appear a little bit closer set, is because the one with eyes apart test, and his eyes are a little bit more closer set in terms of the eye width. His eye aspect ratio is a tier 2 at 3.8. So 3.8 means that he does have narrow eyes, which you can obviously see. Now, you might think that this is kind of like hunter eyes and all that other stuff, but there's a reason why it's too much of something. You don't want to have too much of something. If it's too narrow, it's off, or if it's too rounded, it's off. You want it to kind of have a little balance between each other. You don't want it to be too much on the narrow side. You don't want it to be too much on the rounded side. You want it to have in between both. His lower lip to upper lip ratio is 1.3. 1.3 means that his upper lip is a tad bit too tall. So if his upper lip was just a bit smaller, it would be perfect. So even though it's kind of hard to see his lips, but his upper lip should be a little bit smaller in proportion to his lower lip. His deviation from the ipsilateral angle to the jaw frontal angle. So the ipsilateral angle is that angle created from the midface that you see on top, and his is at 16 degrees. And the reason why it's off again is really because of his jaw frontal angle being so narrow. So like I said again, if his chin was a little bit shorter, his jaw frontal angle will be a little bit more wider. So if he did have a less of a longer chin, I feel like his jaw frontal angle will be much wider, and it will harmonize with his other features of his face. His eyebrow tilt is a 2 degrees. I mean, not 2 degrees, tier 2. And what the tier 2 means is that this is not bad, this is normal. And this is perfectly fine for a male. Males don't really have upturned eyebrows like that. So 0 degrees isn't too bad. And this can also be looked at as maybe like 2 degrees as well, because he does have a little bit of tilt within the eye area or with the eyebrow area, but I just put it at 0 because that's what I saw. His bitemporal width, so how much forehead exposure does he have relative to the width of his face, and his is at 94%. 94% means that he does have a pretty wide forehead, but it's within reason. It's at the upper end of the ideal range, but this is perfectly fine. His lower third proportions is 29%, and 29% is just slightly off. Like I said again, if he did have a shorter chin, this would have been perfect. But yeah, so his chin is making a lot of his proportions and his measurements off just by having a long chin. The ipsilateral angle is 92 degrees. 92 degrees is perfectly fine again. I think this is probably due to his eyes being closer set, so it kind of helps with that ipsilateral angle being more tighter of an angle, so you don't want it to be, and it also tells you whether his eye orbits are wide, so it also indicates whether you have wide eye orbits or not, which his eye orbits might be wide, but they're more closure set, so it kind of helps balance this measurement out, so it gives it more of a tighter angle. His gonial angle is 115 degrees. 115 degrees indicates to me that he does have a very sharp gonial angle, and this is perfect. And ideally, men have more sharper jaw angles than women. His nasofrontal angle is 130 degrees. Now, 130 is ever so slightly off, but this still indicates that he does have a brow region, and he does have a brow ridge. It's just that his brow ridge isn't as prominent as it could be. It's only 1 degree off, so this is literally like, in my opinion, like this is perfect in my honest opinion, but it just ever so slightly off. His mandibular plane angle is 21 degrees. 21 degrees means that his mandible is not too downswung. It's still at the lower end. It's still at the higher range of the ideal range, but this is still perfectly fine. His mandible isn't too downswung as it might seem in other photos, I guess you can say. But in this one, his mandible isn't too downswung, so that's not bad. And that's also one of the reasons why he does have a sharp gonial angle as well. So this is one of the ways that it can contribute to a sharper gonial angle. His ramus to mandible ratio is a tier 1 at 0.71, so his ramus is 71% of his mandible, so he does have a lengthy ramus. His facial convexity from the glabella, so from the chin to the subnasal to the glabella or the brow region, is 166 degrees. 166 degrees is ever so slightly off from 168, so this is not too bad. It just indicates that he does have a rounded facial convexity. His segmental cervical angle is 115 degrees. 115 degrees is ever so slightly off, and one of the reasons why is, like I said again, he does have a low hyoid bone, so that bone on the upper region of his neck is sticking out too far, and that's why it is slightly off. His nasofacial angle is a tier 1 at 34 degrees. Now, 34 degrees is perfectly fine, so he does have a good relationship between his chin and his nose, and they do harmonize well. His nasolabial angle is 98 degrees. 98 degrees means that he does have a very upturned nose, and you do not want to have a droopy nose, especially as a male. And so this makes his face look youthful from the side view angle. His orbital vector is slightly negative, so you don't want your eye orbit bone to be underneath the actual eye itself. You want it to protrude past the eye, but for him, his is slightly the opposite. So you want to have that deep set eye appearance. It doesn't matter if you're male or female. It's just more of an attractive trait to have. His total facial convexity. All right, so this is the whole total facial convexity, including the nose protrusion or the nasal protrusion. His is at 141, so that is within the middle of the distribution, and this is perfectly fine. So he does have good total facial convexity. His mental labial angle is a tier 1 at 126 degrees. This also indicates that he does have a protrusive chin, and he also does have a very protrusive lower lip, and they do harmonize well with each other to create that indent that you see in the middle. His facial convexity from the nasion is 161 degrees. 161 degrees is ever so slightly rounded. If it was 2 degrees a little bit more, then he would be within the ideal range. So this is just his facial convexity overall, just slightly ever so rounded. His nasal projection is 0.55, and this barely makes it, and anything less than this will be outside of the preferred range for nasal protrusion, but this is not too bad. He does have enough nasal protrusion for his nose. His nasal width to height ratio, or his nasal width to height projection, is 0.81, so he does have a pretty lengthy nose for his face, and this also can help with the ipsilateral aliar angle as well. Line is a tier 3. Now, the reason why it's a tier 3 is because the lower lip is actually touching the line, and this should actually be behind the line. The H line goes from the tip of the upper lip down to the chin, and the lower lip is actually supposed to be in line with the line or barely even touching the line, and his is actually past the line. His S line goes from the middle of the nose down to the chin, and the upper lip does touch the line barely, but the lower lip again passes the line, so his lower lip is actually the problem. And his bursal line is a tier 2, and both lips are actually the same length when assessing it from the subnasal down to the chin. So that's why it's a tier 2. If his lower lip was actually more protrusive than his upper lip, that will also indicate that he does have an underbite, or it will also indicate to me that it will be a tier 3 as well. So there's no way that you can have a underbite and be a tier 2. You have to be a tier 3 if you do have an underbite, and this is the best measurement to determine if somebody have an underbite. His nasal mental angle. So this is another way to assess the nasal protrusion, or the nose relationship between the nose and the chin, and it also takes into effect your facial convexity as well. So that's the difference between the nasal mental angle and the nasal facial angle. So those are two of the same measurements. It just one is also taken into account your facial convexity, which this one takes into account his facial convexity, and his is at 126 degrees, and he does have a perfect nasal mental angle. So they both do correlate and harmonize with each other. His gonial to mouth relationship. So the gonial bone is where the ramus and the mandible meet. So those two vectors meet, and his gonial bone is actually below his mouth line, as you can see. And this means that he doesn't have an adequate sized jaw for his face, and this means that he has a developed jaw. His recession relative to the Frankfurt plane is it indicates that he doesn't have any jaw recession, and as you can see, it actually passes the nasion, right? And it also passes the glabella as well, ever so slightly. So this is perfect. His browish inclination is 13 degrees. 13 degrees means that he ever so slightly just made it into the ideal range. So he does have a brow ridge, or I guess you can call it a forehead inclination. So his forehead is inclined back enough. And so this is perfectly fine. His nasal tip. Now, this is one of his biggest flaws. I'll probably say this like maybe his second or third biggest flaws, apart from his chin and his head shape. His nose is a little bit too rounded, or it's too dull or bulbous around the tip of his nose, and his nose doesn't have a defined shape around the end of it. So 144 is completely outside of the ideal range, and that would be a huge flaw for him. His lower lip to submental plane angle, and this is pretty much two measurements in one, is his subcervical angle and also the mental labial angle put into one, and he did good on one of them. The subcervical angle he didn't do good on because of his low hyoid, but since this is not measuring that, he should do good on this one, which he does do good on this one by having 94 degrees on it, which is perfectly fine. And he doesn't really have a chin that is way too protrusive, so I can kind of see why he will do very well on this. And he doesn't also have loose skin underneath the jaw region, so that is usually one of the contributing factors to having a bad lower lip to submental plane angle. So he doesn't have loose skin, and he does have good chin protrusion, so I can kind of see why this measurement is ideal. His inferior third of the face / lower third of the facial proportions is 0.41. 0.41 means that he is ever so slightly off, and like the lower third proportions that we did in the front view of his face was kind of off a little bit by, I think it was 29%. This one is ever so slightly off at 0.41, so 41%. And ideally you want your upper third to be ever so slightly more, but like I said again, his chin is just too powerful. His chin is just too overwhelming. It's just a little bit too long, so that kind of hinders him with this measurement right here. So if his chin was just a little bit less protrusive or a little bit less long, it would be better. It's too long, 77%. Now, what this entails is that he actually does have a perfect malocclusion or a perfect bite. He did have braces when he was younger, so that kind of like threw things off a little bit, because usually like the B line, which is the bursal line, and the S2 line will have a little bit of correlation in some aspects, but the S2 line is the best when it comes to indicating whether you have a malocclusion 1 or 2. So I'm gonna stick with this one to give me the real malocclusion, or the malocclusion that he may have, because I know he doesn't really have an underbite, But yeah, so he does have a perfect malocclusion. But what I'm trying to say is that he probably did have an underbite when he was young because he was wearing braces when he was younger. So malocclusion 1, and yeah, he does have a perfect bite. And the last measurement is the Z angle. So this indicates whether you have a adequate size lips for your face, and or how prominent your lips are for your face. If you have a good prominence of lips proportions to your facial proportions, I guess you could say. And his is at 72 degrees. Now 72 degrees is completely normal. It's in the normal range, but it's not within the ideal range. Now it is not too far away from the ideal range where you really want to be at. And 72 is not bad. Most people can't even get within the normal range because either they have lips that are not protrusive, or they have lips that are very protrusive. So being in normal range is perfectly fine. But what this measurement alone indicates to me is that if you're in the normal range but not in the ideal range, you're not going to pass all your lip measurements. But if you're in the ideal range and you have good nasal protrusion and you also have good chin protrusion, you should pass all your lip measurements. So they kind of all do go together as one. And another good example is, y'all can also watch this video too. Prince Harry's wife, Meghan, she has ideal lip protrusion, and her lips were just flawless. Like I don't think she had anything bad with her lips. So just to give people an idea, if I want to watch that video, to have an idea. And also another thing too, with this angle as well, you want your upper lip to actually touch the line. So as you can see, his bottom lip is actually touching the line. Now, preferably, you want your upper lip to touch the line with this measurement, right? Now, it usually goes with the lip that is the most protrusive, which is his lower lip. Now, just because your lower lip is more protrusive doesn't mean that this is bad or negative or whatnot, but preferably you want your upper lip to be the one that's touching the line, right? So that's one of the reasons why his lip measurements were off, is because his lower lip is more protrusive than his upper lip in general, right? Or just about. So yeah, this is pretty much it. Like I said again, if you want me to rate your face, I will have my email down in the description and also my IG. Do not be afraid. I can literally rate anybody. Like it can be your mom, your sister, your brother, you. It doesn't really matter. So just make sure to hit me up, and yeah, you'll get your face rated within maybe 2 to 3 days, depending on how busy I am that day. But yeah, so I'm out. Peace.